All right, welcome everyone. So excited to see so many people signing in. So that's wonderful. I know it's such a busy time and in the middle of the day out here on the East Coast, and also very late in Slovenia. It's about 8 o'clock, or I don't know, is it? I think it's 8 p.m. there, or 7, I can't remember. But welcome to the Invasive Species Creative Proposal Series, where we are artists, creatives, ecologists, proposing creative solutions to the mitigation and understanding of invasive plants and how they thrive and where they thrive. So this is a series of talks that's ongoing. We might be ending it in July or August. So we'll have 4 or 5 more talks after this. So stay tuned, and all of you having signed up will get links for that or get notifications. So everyone should be signing up for each one. But anyway, so I just want to introduce Ellie here and welcome Ellie for coming and speaking today. So excited for her work. Her work is amazing. I met her in New York, doing plant work myself, just trying to find my people. So that was wonderful. So Ellie is an artist, an educator, living, working in Mohican land in Troy, New York, working across media from watercolor painting to unlawning experiments. Her practices combine socially engaged art and ecology fieldwork. Recent work involves collaborations about and with some spontaneous urban plants, aka weeds, including co-founding the Next Epoch Seed Library, which is such a cool project she does with Anne, I forget her last name, and the Environmental Performance Agency, which is also another really amazing project. Ellie received a BA from Scripps College and an MFA from Hunter College. She's currently a PhD candidate in the arts practice at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, researching forms of artistic practice that cultivate plant-human solidarity. Recent exhibitions include the Department of Human and Natural Services at Nurture Art, Ecological Consciousness, Artists and Instigators at Wave Hill, which is a garden up in, I think it's in Queens, and Unsettled Nature at the Smithsonian Museum of Natural History. Her work has been covered by publications ranging from Art in America and the Processing of the Natural Academy of Sciences, Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. So many accomplishments in the world of ecology and how we understand it, and using art to sort of engage people. It's so wonderful. So if there's anything else you want to mention, Ellie, about yourself, please go ahead, and I'll hand it off to you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Wonderful. Thanks for that introduction and for having me here today. I've been watching this series with interest and got to catch up recently on the other ones in the series. So I'm just really pleased and honored also to get to join the group of folks that you've invited so far. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen just so we can get going, and then I'll do some more introductions. Okay, just to make sure you can see. Does all look right, Alyssa? Did I get it the right way? I'm going to assume I didn't just like... Are we good? I'm not getting any feedback.
Sorry, I muted myself. No, it looks great.
It looks good. Okay, cool. Somehow I lost most of my Zoom interface. So, okay, there it is. Okay, wonderful. Yeah, so you got everything right. Except one little bit of my bio that is a relief to update now is that I am now done with that dissertation and I am no longer a student as of like the end of December. So that's exciting. yeah, I'm going to jump right in. As you heard in my bio, I'm talking to you from Mohican land in current day upstate New York. I've titled my talk today, Feral and Invasive Pigments, Learning with and from Weeds Through Ecosocial Art. And I decided to break this talk into 3 parts roughly today. It's a little bit longer than some talks I've given recently. So if it starts to feel like we're bogged down and we want to have discussion, we can do that at those points. First, I'm going to give you an introduction to my work and get us situated theoretically and physically. Will be the first part. Then I'll go into the nuts and bolts of how I make watercolor paints from weedy plants, assuming that there's some folks here who are interested in that. And then I'll wrap up with an exploration of some of the fields that have influenced me in doing this work, from novel ecosystems theory to critical pedagogy. And yes, moving forward. So to get us oriented a bit, as you heard, I'm an artist and I practice what I think of as ecosocial art as a form of interdisciplinary artistic practice that combines ecological art and socially engaged art through a multi-species lens, meaning that it engages with more than human life and land as active partners and takes social engagement and interaction as a primary artistic medium. This means I use walks and workshops and other participatory events alongside more traditional artistic techniques like painting and drawing and video and sculpture, creating work that's aimed at trying to understand and live with the ecological and the social as interdependent and entangled. And while I think I've been working towards this kind of practice pretty much my whole life, this current vein started in earnest about 9 years ago when I started making these watercolor paints out of weedy plants living around my studio in Bushwick, Brooklyn. And like I said, I'll get to that in more detail shortly. But first, I want to ground and situate us a little bit more. So over the past decade, since I started working with weedy plants, I've become particularly engaged with forms of ecosocial art that cultivate what I think of as plant-human solidarity. I think teaching and learning with and from plants, which I've come to call phytocentric pedagogy, plant-centered pedagogy, is one way to build that cross-species allyship, which, along with many others, probably most of you here, I understand is essential to the future of increasingly urban human communities, navigating climate chaos and its associated injustices. As I explored in my just completed dissertation work at Rensselaer Polytechnic, I'm committed to learning with and from disturbance-oriented plants who are experts at taking the first steps towards healing land damaged by industrialization, urbanization, and extraction. Like this pokeweed plant sprouting from toxin-filled soil that's been capped with cement and gravel as a remediation method. My practice is dedicated to conspiring with these plants in the sense described by artist and anthropologist Natasha Myers, to lessen the harms of our compromised times. Compromised times being a phrase from the feminist philosopher Alexis Shotwell. Reclaiming the term weedy from its derogatory associations, this orientation grows out of hands-on collaborative work in habitats that are often overlooked as sites of natural cultural value. Like, for instance, this car repair yard turned urban weeds garden, which was the headquarters of my artist collective, the Environmental Performance Agency, in 2017. These disturbed habitats also include urban sidewalks and streets with their fragmented plant communities and locked away soil, and the intensively managed greenery of monocultural lawns like the National Mall in DC. Each of these habitats springs from land damaged by the extractive pressures of capitalism and settler colonialism, ecocidal systems I am complicit in. Following the Potawatomi writer and plant biologist Robin Wall Kimmerer, weedy plants, whether they're native or naturalized, rebuild and repair damaged land, preparing the way for recovery. That little sprout really wants to be a tree, maybe a honey locust. Teachings and learnings like this have led to ongoing projects like the Lawn Redisturbance Laboratory, for which over the past 4 years, alongside my core collaborator Anne Prococo and many others, I've removed roughly 1,000 pounds of turf from a range of lawns. It's about 30 square meters of turf. It's really heavy in many ways. We've done this work to make collaborative sculptures with communities of humans and plants. Experimenting with communal unlawning through a melding of sculpture, plant-human stewardship, like gardening, and urban ecology protocols has given us a container in which to stretch, refine, undo, and strengthen our concerns, questions, assumptions, dreams, and desires for living lawns differently in the future. Doing our best to open ourselves up to what the plants in each place are teaching us about what the land can support, what it can do on its own, and where we can collaborate and assist. Before I go any further, I want to return to the fact that I'm speaking today from Mohican land. As I said, this land is currently known as Troy, New York. It's a post-industrial town full of weedy plant life, and it's perched right on the massive, magnificent, and deeply polluted Mahikanituk River, also known as the Hudson. Given my interest in learning from and with plants, it feels essential to acknowledge that the indigenous peoples of this region, the Mohican, Haudenosaunee, Munsee Lenape, have long understood plants as active agents in the world, as relatives, and in some cases as teachers. As a settler on this land, an orientation towards plant agency and wisdom is something I'm attuning to as an adult. I do this work in deference to and with much gratitude for the many living knowledge systems that have shepherded myriad forms of Indigenous botanical knowledge across the centuries, and a commitment to remain attuned to the shifting terrain between amplification and allyship, and extraction and exploitation of those lifeways and knowledge systems. I'm going to pause for a moment to sit with that gratitude and that complexity. If you'd like to, you can take a few deep breaths with me. I invite you to look away from the screen for a moment, maybe just above and beyond it, and breathe. Thanks for doing that with me. So while I've been working with lawns for the past 4 years, I didn't jump right into work with manicured spaces. This orientation towards disrupting monoculture habitats grew out of engagement with weedy plant life along the streets and sidewalks of Munsee Lenape land in Brooklyn, New York, where, as I mentioned, about 9 years ago or so, I started harvesting spontaneous urban plants, also known as weeds, to make watercolor paint. I made paintings about the plants I harvested from and started teaching others how to do the same through walks and workshops. This expanded my solo studio process, connecting it directly to the living landscape right outside my studio doors, and it really brought the socially engaged component of my work to life. Through hands-on research, I started to practice what I've come to think of as public field work in urban habitats, drawing attention to the vibrancy and value of the living land. Engaging with these weedy urban plants and their habitats brought up lots of fraught questions around belonging, nativeness, and the agency of plants and land. As I got to know the plants I worked with, I learned they were cosmopolitan beings. This painting here shows how pokeweed, native to the lands now known as the southeastern United States, has migrated following flows of commerce and human migration around the temperate world, from South Africa and southeastern Australia to the cities of Japan. While Asiatic dayflower in blue, originally from Japan, where it was cultivated for pigment, has migrated to the United States, where it lives in cities and is also gaining notoriety as a superweed in Roundup-ready soybean fields. I certainly could have called this project my weedy pigments project, but these other terms floated to the surface for a couple of reasons. For me, the term feral is a term generally associated with animal life, so using it to talk about plants helps center plant agency, which I hope, in addition to that, also helps dismantle these hierarchical exclusionary forms of human supremacy. that damaging genre of human that Sylvia Wynter frames as man with a capital M. Additionally, in ways that resonate with Catriona Sandiland's concept of feral feminisms, these beings exist somewhere between our common assumption about what is wild and what is domestic or cultivated. And in that way, they further trouble these Cartesian Euro-Western tendencies to think and act in binary divisions. In this particular instance, sure, this Asiatic dayflower grew without being directly planted by a human, but my lifestyle and that of others like me makes their existence possible. They act invasively in some situations, like in Roundup Ready soybean fields in the Midwestern United States, where it seems they've developed resistance to Monsanto's glyphosate-based herbicide Roundup, which puts them into the category of superweed. While in East Asia, one of the places they evolved and are considered native, they're showing the ability to thrive in intensely contaminated soils of old copper mines, heavy metal tolerant. And in both these cases, it's the pressure placed on the planet by contemporary Western and global elite lifestyles, from the warming climate to the dense built environment that we have in places like New York City, that is rendering life impossible for some species. In this particular context, the coastal cordgrass that used to grow in this spot 500 years ago, but at the same time, very possible for this tough, weedy wildflower who is tolerant of heavy metals and herbicides and somehow can grow out of the side of a building. So that's one of the things I come back to again and again when I'm thinking about weediness, feralness, invasiveness. What is the context? What is the habitat? Who is being harmed by this introduced migrant plant? Are they growing exuberantly, just barely hanging on, or have they naturalized? And as I'm sure many of you know, Dow Ryan provided the salt cedar example a few sessions ago. Even native plants can act invasively if conditions change in a way that favors their growth over that of other organisms. And this is bound to happen more and more with climate change. And I'd love to have a conversation with you all about that if you're interested, what the thinking about like a harm reduction approach that weighs the pluses and minuses of management and tending in reciprocal relationships with these extremely exuberant plants. So questions like these just keep swirling around for me and keep sending me out into the field again and again. And kind of a little ways into the invasive pigments project, being in the field started to awaken me further and further to how plants were guiding and teaching me. And I started looking for ways to open myself and my audience up to what they were teaching. In the instance of this ongoing project, as I followed these flecks of color from blossoms and berries, I also started to see and collect detritus left in the landscape by humans. And as other folks have asked in this lecture series, which of these arrangements is really invasive, right? How do we think about the ubiquitous endocrine disrupting properties of degrading but never disappearing microplastics in relationship to the cyclical color of so-called invasive plant life? I'm thinking back to Rosa's talk about knotweed as organic fertilizer. We know with some caveats can decompose and cycle back into the system they came from, if we let them. Of course, many municipalities don't let these plants cycle back into the soil. So it's these complexities and frictions. What is trash? What is valuable? What is a resource? What is a burden? How that cycles and accumulates that have sustained my work with feral and invasive, with this particular project, Feral and Invasive Pigments, over so many years. It keeps me out there in the field again and again, and then returning to the studio to investigate and contend with the realities of often unwanted plant life in urban settings. And so that's a bit of a theoretical framework, I think, for where I'm sitting right now. And with that, I just want to take another pause. Let's just take a moment. Join me if you want to detune from the screen and towards vegetal life. I'm going to start with a question. Do you know where the sun is right now? Just take a moment to consider this. Now, can you rotate your face, shoulders, and torso to greet it, even if it's out of view, even if it's below the horizon? And with your body rotated towards the sun, we're just going to take 5 deep breaths. And let's return to the screen. Again, thanks for doing that with me. I am not in a position to see the chat, so I don't know if there's any questions right now. I'm about to move into like the nuts and bolts of pigment, but if someone has something burning you'd like to talk about right now, we could.
I don't see anything in the chat, but yeah, if anyone wants to chime in, feel free.
And of course, we can talk at the end. Cool. Yeah, so if we're good to go, I'll return us to the process of pigment making. For anyone who wants to try this, I'm going to start with the current pigment project I'm working on right now. Just love to provide context whenever possible. So over about the last month, I've been working on a new palette to investigate the feral ecologies of a small slice of land currently known as Hudson, New York. Current day Hudson is a post-industrial town 20 miles south of Troy on the Mahikanituk River, the Hudson, so right on the same river where I live. And I'm focusing on a portion of land around the art and performance venue Basilica Hudson, where I'm doing a residency right now. And Basilica right now is at the beginning of a 10-year plan to upgrade and restore their facilities and grounds with an eye towards climate preparedness and sustainability. And their building that they're in right now, which they will keep but refurbish, exists on Mohican lands that were marsh and estuary prior to colonization. Well, this land, even to this day, is still referred as the South Bay. There's not really any water here anymore. The waterway landscape has been cut off from the river and filled in. There's a few marshes around still. Abandoned factories, a gravel quarry, railroad tracks, and a county correctional facility exist on land that was once estuarial marsh, tied to tidal flows coming up the river from New York Harbor and the Atlantic. So while the Basilica renovation plan will likely involve a landscaping firm and restoration using native plantings, they're also interested, as I am, in the vibrant feral and invasive ecologies that have emerged on the site over the past several centuries. Approaching the site through the lens of feral and invasive pigment making gives me the chance to investigate, engage, appreciate, document, and share the important work these plants have done to green and heal a landscape inundated by industrialization and extraction. I'm starting the work now in the slow and quiet months of winter, and I'll continue through the spring, summer, and fall of this year. I posted my first plant survey in late December to iNaturalist, if anyone uses that community science app. Came up with a little more than 20 species in the kind of quiet time of the year, expecting to get a lot more as I get to watch the season cycle. And I collected about 8 that I'm interested in experimenting with for this pigment palette. Some I'm super familiar with, like pokeweed, and others are new to me for pigment purposes, like this juniper, which is really widespread all over the site. Beautiful fruits that I collected. And I also collected detritus for a color wheel. I'm going to make one of those. I found an old railroad spike, which I'll use to make ferrous sulfate. That's a kind of mordant often used in dyeing, but it can also shift the color of some of the pigments. Here it's sitting in a mixture of water and vinegar in a jar, and I might use it to deepen and enrich some of the pigments. So I get these plant parts back in the studio after I've collected, and I use a range of tools and techniques that are adapted from a traditional centuries-old process to make my plant-based watercolor paint. These are steps as listed in a guide I made about the project, which is available on my website. It's due for an update. I think I made it in 2016 and come up with some more techniques. Hopefully that will come soon, but if you need a link to it, let me know. It's like linked from a paragraph on that page. So I start by cleaning and sorting the petals or the plant parts. It could be berries, it could be even roots once in a while. I put 1 to 2 tablespoons of plant material depending on the plant and the quantity I need, into a mortar and pestle. I've found that stainless steel is really best for a variety of reasons. It's a lot easier to work with small quantities of plant material in them. And then I add a dollop of acacia gum syrup. This is also known as gum arabic. This is the traditional binder for watercolor paints. I'm going to go off on a little bit of a tangent about gum arabic because I think it's important to think about plants as commodities. Gum arabic is a natural plant product. It's made of the sap of a few different types of acacia trees that are native to Northern Africa. It's also a highly commodified product. From what I've been able to learn about it, it's largely harvested by hand in current day Sudan and other countries in Northern Africa, mostly in Sudan, mostly from wild growing trees, but it's also increasingly cultivated, and folks are starting to plant trees in like plantation style. And those who harvest it make it available globally through a supply chain that, as you might guess, enriches large corporations over the people who harvest it. There are a few sources popping up that are claiming to be fair trade and direct supply, mostly aimed at food grade gum arabic. It's actually used in a huge range of products, like soda pop, for instance. So while the paint I make is plant-based, it's not local or pure. Rather, it's hybrid, complex, complicit in these supply chains, right? So to get back to the process, I add a drop of this gum arabic as a binder, right? It binds the pigment to the paper. It creates a nice viscosity. It allows light to refract through the pigment and the binder and onto the paper and out again. That's what creates like kind of luminosity that we love in watercolors. I also add a little locally harvested honey, which functions both as an antimicrobial and it makes the paint a little less brittle. I also add a bit of water to the paint in most situations. Sometimes with berries, they're nice and juicy and you don't have to, but with most things, I'll add some water. Sometimes I experiment with water collected on site. For instance, from a holding pond, as you see here, that was on the Basilica site, right next to an old salt pile, and like lined it with plastic, assuming it's contaminated in some way. But I also will try with distilled water. Different compounds in the water and its acidity can affect the color produced. So I grind these ingredients together. I send them through various sieves to remove the plant fibers and other residue. The paint drips out onto a glass sheet. And then I use this traditional paint making tool. It's like a hand blown glass muller. It's the small one, you can get a much bigger, to make sure the pigment and binder are thoroughly mixed and the paint is as smooth as possible. At this point, depending on the use and the plant, I'll divide the paint into 2 or more batches and add mordants that shift the color to some of them, like that ferrous sulfite I mentioned that I'm making from the railroad spike. In this case, the ones pictured here, I added another common mordant, aluminum sulfate, also known as alum. You can see the one that says +A is a little more turquoise green and the plain is a little more on the blue side. And this process gives me several shades of paint from each plant part, which I then store in individual wells and I just let it dry over a few days in a well-ventilated area. And at this point, they can be used like normal watercolor paints. You can either use them when they're wet, let them dry, or store them for an indefinite amount of time. They do take some getting used to when you're painting with them. It can be a bit recalcitrant and finicky. Some plants are a lot easier to paint with than others. And I actually really like that variation. I think of it as a conversation with the plant and what it has to offer in this form. And another question I get a lot, yes, the pigments do deteriorate over time if exposed to UV light. They do that at different paces for different pigment compounds. I'm actually okay with that. It's also part of the cycle of working with living material that isn't biologically inert. Sometimes I go back to old pieces and update them with new pigments. I'll make a note of when and how and why I updated the painting, so the piece is layered over time in response to the way the plant pigments shift. This means returning to the same plant season after season, year after year, sometimes to discover my favorite pokeweed has been hidden away under concrete or a new building foundation. Other times I find them flourishing with new abandon, which is heartwarming often. Yeah, so that kind of wraps up the pigment part. If there's urgent questions right now, I can certainly talk about them, or we can go on. I'm going to give you a little more context for kind of the other disciplines that inform this work. I'll give myself a little breather at least. And then I think of maybe 10 minutes, 15 minutes left, something like that. Yeah, so the questions and concerns and revelations that have bubbled up through this work really do come out of hands-on work in the urban landscape and close collaborations with a range of humans who also care for weedy life. From the Environmental Performance Agency, who I mentioned before, to the Next Epoch Seed Library and my collaborator, Anne Prococo. And those projects themselves have also been shaped by the generous and capacious thinking coming out of a range of disciplines within the arts, from feminist performance art and socially engaged art and ecological art. And outside of the arts, for instance, I draw on novel ecosystems theory, an interdisciplinary branch of ecology focused on the study of habitats that are transformed beyond likely return to an often ill-defined reference state. This field gives me sustenance and data to trouble purity-driven notions of conservation and restoration, false binaries between so-called invasive and native beings, and reductive notions about the value of feral green space. The ballooning interest in plant agency and ingenuity, explored in nuanced ways by the emergent field of critical plant studies, keeps me in awe of vegetal life and circumspect about its exploitation. While land-based and indigenous pedagogies, from Sandy Grande to Eve Tuck to Melissa Bang, from these folks, I gratefully receive the reminder to attend to the layered histories of the living land, resisting the tendency of dominant Euro-Western earth science to neutralize the impacts of settler colonial violence, or greenwash and gentrify away difference in neo-colonial ways. While critical pedagogy helps me build and renew a commitment to horizontal modes of teaching and learning that recognize the expertise, tacit knowledge, and embodied wisdom of all participants in ways that actively dissent against the history and ongoing presence of oppression and exclusion. Combining the influences of these fields, I want to investigate and share the wonders and troubles of weedy urban plants, reminding myself and others constantly that our relationships with weedy plants must be reciprocal, that we overlook them to our peril. I remind myself again and again, I'm sure all of you know, cities of the scale we see today haven't been around very long and are growing bigger every day. A common statistic says that 66% of the world's population is predicted to live in cities by 2050. That's versus only 3% 200 years ago. This is a massive landscape transformation, and it's still continuing. This is an open corner in Northeast Brooklyn. It's experiencing cycles of growth and mowing and regrowth year after year. This ongoing cycle keeps this pocket of open earth in a state of perpetual renewal, favoring fast-growing, light-loving species that are good at growing in exposed soil. It also selects for plants that can adapt their growth form. On the left is a pepperweed plant growing along the fence out of the mower's reach. On the right is the dense growth of a pepperweed plant that sits in the mower's path. The images I just showed you are part of my Feral Landscape Typologies project, which is a photography and mapping project that has given me a more systematic way to explore the shifting urban plant habitat. Through this project, I'm continuing to explore how, in an era of rapid urbanization and biodiversity loss, it's important to understand who lives in fragmented, polluted, disturbed sites and how, so that we know what we lose and gain, at whose expense and to whose advantage as they come and go.
They're recording.
Hello, I'm hearing someone else talking. Are we good? All right, I'll keep going. Yeah, and just to remind ourselves, we all know this, but I repeat it. like a mantra. When allowed to flourish, these green beings among us, perhaps most obviously, but still miraculously, turn sunlight into food. They also break up impervious surfaces, stabilize and build soil, mitigate the urban heat island effect by cooling the air, reduce stormwater runoff, capture airborne pollutants, and perhaps even aid human mental health through subliminal exposure to green space. And they do all of this despite, or in some ways because of, the incessant human tendency to disturb and redisturb the landscape. Here is a meadow full of disturbance-oriented wildflowers who are considered native in Brooklyn. White snakeroot, goldenrod, horseweed. Living behind a chain link fence and framed by introduced, and in some cases invasive, Japanese knotweed, tree of heaven, and white mulberry. They're all flourishing here in mid-autumn. This was October 2015 to be exact. And here's the same plant community in the spring, May 29th of the following year, when the site was maintained in the most brutal way possible with a bulldozer. It was then left fallow and started the cycle of recovery and renewal. Here it is in July, a few months later. The disturbance-oriented plants, again, those weedy ones who are best at jumping into a crisis, stabilize the soil until other less rapidly growing, less sun-loving, less hardy plants can join in. And so we get the kind of flux that animates a lot of urban plant habitats. This is another series documenting the ephemeral nature of open earth. Much of this so-called vacant land can be found in these awkward leftover spaces that are hard to build on. So we get a lot of these triangular slices. That's another part of this typology. It's looking at these types of vacant land. Not really vacant, of course. In the case of this lot, it goes from a feral forest to a patio and parking lot over a period of a few months. And of course, this version with the patio has certain affordances the feral forest didn't have. And it shouldn't be the responsibility of individuals to fill the city with green space. Lack of green space is an environmental and ecosocial justice issue that needs to be addressed systemically. Regardless, the value of these feral spaces as they come and go is generally unrecognized and unrecorded. And of course, the approach to maintenance and stewardship in these spaces remains in question. As I asked before, come back to this picture again and again. When do we do more harm than good by treating certain plants as the enemy? What does an ethic of care rather than control look like when it comes to relationships with living land damaged by the extractive pressures of capitalism and colonialism? Can more human hands tending the land help disrupt some of these vicious cycles of disturbance and violence? These are questions I continue to grapple with, but looking to the weeds through plant-centered pedagogy, learning what they have to teach, what we can learn together, and what they are learning from us across the vast and generative differences between human life and vegetal life as we navigate this crumbling Holocene, Anthropocene, whatever you want to call it. I know for sure that I need their wisdom, there's no question, and the sustenance they provide. And I'm grateful to attune to it alongside many others, you all included, who also find allyship with plants to be one life-giving pathway for staying with the trouble. It's Donna Haraway's term, as we move into unknown times ahead. And with that, I will say thank you. And if anyone cares, a bibliography, I'm happy to share these materials. And a lot of this stuff is referenced in my dissertation, which is also online, and I can share if folks want. And with that, I will stop my share. And here we are.
Thank you so much. That was so wonderful. So much good stuff and good content in there. Does anyone have any questions that you would like to ask right now? I can actually continue to record, but I can maybe stop it. Yeah, maybe I'll stop the recording and then people might feel more free to ask questions.
Sure.